Welcome to this very first video of my brand new YouTube channel. Essentially, I've been called to launch this YouTube channel, and it's been a recurring theme for quite a while amongst the universe just wanting me and showing me sign after sign that I need to launch out this channel to get these messages out, because there is going to be at least one person that benefits from this message along their awakening journey, just like I have benefited from so many YouTubers, teachers, guides throughout my own journey of the last few years. And so I'm going to launch this YouTube channel with the intention of just getting the messages out there, and I'm going to leave it up to the universe to synchronize who will resonate with the messages the most that need it. And that's the intention I'm putting out there, that it just benefits the highest good of anyone who comes across it. So if that's you and these messages resonate with you, that's awesome. I'd love for you to let me know wherever, in the comments or private message, email, whatever. And if it doesn't, that's fine too. It might be something that impacts you in a few years to come. It might be something that tells you it's not for you, and it benefits you in that way because it guides you to what you would prefer to resonate with. So I'm launching this out it's going to be authentic. There's going to be minimal production value, as you can probably already tell, minimal editing, and it's just the sole purpose of this channel is to present the messages as I receive them. I receive a lot of downloads from the universe, higher self, whatever you want to call it, now that I've essentially cleared a lot of distortion out of my field, out of my psychology. There are messages from higher self that come through quite regularly, quite strongly, and the frequency of it is very, very strongly correlated to higher self and soul, which means I know it's going to be something that needs to be shared. And oftentimes throughout my journey of the last 4 to 5 years in this awakening journey, if that's what we call it, I've benefited immensely from coming across other YouTubers, teachers, books, courses, friends, new acquaintances, anything you name it. The universe has orchestrated it so well that it helps me on my journey of essentially remembering who I am and who we all are. So if this benefits you, then that's great. Take what resonates, leave what doesn't. Don't believe me at face value on anything I have to say. I can't stress that enough. Your internal filtration system should be the only thing that you ideally trust, as long as it's in tune with your core self, your higher self. So everything I say, just filter it through your own perception. I'm not here to convince anyone of anything. I'm here to be authentic and just share these messages as they come through, unfiltered. I'm not going to filter any of them, and whoever resonates, like I said, is usually going to be the ones that come across the message. So that's where I'm at with this channel. That's my decision and intention for this channel, that it benefits anyone who comes across it in the way it's intended for your highest good. And if it does benefit you, I'd just love to hear about it, and that's about it. So in this very first video, I am going to kick off by talking about one of my favorite subjects, non-duality. So non-duality, essentially getting to the core of the truth of this, who we are, and pulling back the veils, pulling back the layers of who we're not. And in this 3D reality that we've been experiencing for so long, the veils and the distortions and the illusions of separation have brought the planet to a place where it's essentially unsustainable. And so that's why this huge shift is currently taking place on the planet. The planet's increasing in frequency, and those who choose to increase the frequency along with it are going to come into remembrance of who they really are. And the whole reflection in the hologram, the simulation, if you want to call it, of this 3D experience, this physical experience, is going to eventually be reflected through that collective resonance that we're now climbing to and going to be emitting. So non-duality is the concept that we are the one mind. There is only one thing going on, one movement, and we are all that. So we are all fractals or perspectives of the one mind that are currently perceiving through characters to create the experience of a simulation or hologram. And the reason why the original distortion of separation and the illusion of separation kicks in is because we come into this reality in such a dense frequency that the connection to who we really are, source, higher self, is so diluted that at a very young age our physical senses begin interpreting what it experiences, what it sees, feels, can taste, can touch as the truth of who we are and the truth of reality. And so that's how the original distortion, the original sin comes into being. It's through the veil being so thick when we come in that we take our physical senses and physical sense of being and subject object perception to be the truth of reality. We take it to be base reality. And so therefore, coming through that lens of how we go through life, all decisions and all beliefs begin to snowball from there, from that perspective. And so this is where a lot of the suffering comes from, is the original sin, which is the descent into such a distorted and veiled reality that we misperceive the truth. So to just back up a second, I want to explain my understanding of what sin actually is and what it was meant to mean in the Bible. And my understanding of sin is a distorted belief in mistruth of who we really are and what the nature of reality really is. Because if you think about it, if we all had the full recognition of who we truly are from a non-dual perspective, whether we know ourselves to be the soul or know ourselves to be the one mind of God, then what is there to ever suffer over in this physical reality? Because it would just be a perception of us playing a game in a simulation, going around and essentially experiencing through a character, which also I believe is like a light prism, a prism of light that we're viewing through and experiencing through, and inbuilt with that light prism are the physical senses as well. So it's kind of like a virtual reality mask, and the virtual reality mask is the physical avatar. So my idea of the original sin is the belief in separation and the belief in the mistruth of who we really are. And so now we get to the topic of what is it that actually continues to perpetuate this illusion of separation and duality. So we've already talked about the veil, how we come into this reality with veiled consciousness and a very, very thin and almost dissolved, not completely dissolved, but dissolved connection to our higher self and who we really are. We've already talked about how the original sin is the belief then that what we see and feel and experience with our physical senses is the base reality. And even science kind of backs this up by talking about how particles are essentially at the subatomic level 99% empty space. So the next thing I want to talk about, as I mentioned, is what continues to perpetuate this illusion in duality. And essentially what perpetuates it is the fact that the veil is still there, and throughout our whole lives we've gathered up all of these beliefs, and all of these beliefs kind of sit in energy packets around our physical body and energy field. So these energy packets carry information, because vibration carries information. So all of this information that have been created through beliefs in duality, in separation, sit around our aura and energy field and within our physical bodies. Because remember, our physical bodies aren't really solid. They're 99% empty space, which means our physical bodies are as much a part of our mind, our subconscious mind, as anything else. So these information packets sit within our physical body and aura, and then they constantly feed data to the ego operating system about the stories within that energy packet, or the genesis of that energy packet. So let's talk about it, the genesis of an energy packet. And by the way, when I refer to energy packet, it's synonymous with energy block, contracted energy. It all means the same thing. So I'm simply referring to it as an energy packet to create imagery of what I'm actually talking about. So within each of these energy packets creates the information that was formed at the genesis of this energy packet. So the very, very inception of the energy packet, it was probably an event or something that caused a belief to be created. And the ego at the time thought that it was as an impactful of a belief enough to store it within your subconscious mind. So now what happens is that within that energy packet that's sitting within your subconscious, if it's intense enough, it's feeding a data loop like a program to your ego operating system. and your ego operating system is doing everything in its power to perpetuate that program, because it thinks that this program is actually helping the ego to perpetuate your survival. So let's use an analogy for a second, and let's think about, imagine being 8 years old on a playground, and all of a sudden you challenge a friend to a running race, and there's a audience of about 50 people watching. All your friends, people who you want to impress, people who you look up to, and they're watching you in this running race. About 10 meters into the running race, you trip over, fall over, and everyone laughs. Everyone in the playground just starts laughing at you, pointing at you, and in that moment you feel humiliated. Well, what can happen is, and what often happens, especially at a young age, is that we make the decision right there and then that this humiliation is so painful that we never want to experience it again. The ego then picks up on how powerful and painful this information is, these emotions are that you're experiencing, and interprets it as a threat to your very survival. The ego then, wanting to be efficient for future survival probability, keeps a record, creates a record of this incident, creates a record of the whole event, and stores it in the subconscious mind. The reason it does this is because by creating a program of survival, it thinks it's increasing your probability of survival for the future by helping you avoid similar such situations in the future. So what happens then? Let's move forward a decade, for example, and you suddenly realize that throughout all of your teens, because you're 18 now, you've avoided any type of competitive situation. The reason why you've avoided this is because that record within your subconscious mind of this energy packet that was created so long ago, this program that was created 10 years prior, has been perpetuating to help you avoid similar situations because it's perceived as a threat to your very survival. The ego sees this as a threat to your survival. And so you do everything in your power, unconsciously a lot of times, to avoid situations that might even resemble anything even close to what you experienced on the playground on that day. So you can avoid the humiliation, and you can avoid what the ego perceived to be a threat to your survival. So how does all this tie back into the perpetuation of duality? That's just one example of an energy packet that can be formed and stored in the subconscious mind. Oftentimes throughout our lives, especially our young years in this reality, there are dozens and dozens of examples of energy packets like this being formed and stored by the ego because it thinks that it is doing its best to perpetuate your probability of survival for the future by keeping automatic loops of this data just running and running and running in the background, so you'll avoid similar such situations. And how this relates to the perpetuation of duality is because if you've got dozens of these energy packets sitting around you, these energy blocks with data loops feeding into your operating system through the ego that are telling you stories of separation, duality, then that means the perpetuation of duality is constantly running in the background, and it's reinforced by all of these dozens and dozens and dozens of programs. If all those programs were suddenly eliminated, you'd be left with nothing but what you truly are, the non-dual self, the soul, the fractal of the one mind. And so that's how the perpetuation of duality continues, because the veil is still firmly planted, and because all of this data is still continually feeding you information that you are a product of subject-object reality, that you are a product, or that you are a subject inside a dualistic and separate world. And so what we perceive with our physical senses to be the truth and what we perceive to be base reality is nothing more than a perception that we are in a dualistic and separate experience, and that this separate experience is base reality. Now, of course, what sits behind all of those programs is the truth of who we really are, and none of those programs even come close to blemishing or touching the truth of who we really are. It's like our soul comes through and permeates this physical character, and all of a sudden, because the veil's so thick, all of the noise that's created within the physical character and all of these energy packets make the soul forget in a sense of who it really is and perceive it to be the physical character in a subject-object world. So of course there are the examples of people who have broken through the matrix, if you want to call it, broken through duality and realized the non-dual self in an instant without having to do energy clearings and anything of that nature, because ultimately the you that's listening to this right now, the true you, the soul, is there right now. There is no separation. You are the soul. And so you can certainly have a moment of pure clarity, pristine clarity, where you realize you are the soul, all the veils dissolve, and the energy packets, even though they're probably still running, you don't buy into the information loops anymore that that's you, because you know that that's not you. But more common, and what my experience was like, is that I had to dissolve a lot of those energy packets, dissolve a lot of those distorted data loops, a lot of those distorted programs, before I gained a sense of clarity of who I was. And then as I progressed in sitting in who I really was and resting as the soul, the higher self, the non-dual self, as I rested in the non-dual self, I was able to start unraveling the momentum of those energy packets more and more, and kind of crushing the duality, the information in those energy packets from a dualistic standpoint into the non-dual and the truth. And so when these energy packets get transmuted and collapse back into the truth, into this non-dual self, and what this reality really is, they clear because the frequency has been transmuted into what you really are. So it's been converted from dense energy into your soul frequency, essentially. And then along with that transmutation of the frequency, the information changes. The information within that frequency changes. So it's no longer an energy packet of density that's contracted. It's been transmuted into your soul frequency, and so it's been returned into integration back with your soul frequency and the truth of who you are. So that program no longer exists anymore. And when that program no longer exists anymore, the reflection of that in the simulation ceases to be at some point, because with the denseness of this reality, the simulation sometimes takes a little bit of time to catch up with the energetic transmutation or the shifts in energy that has taken place within your auric field. And so just like that, that's how the perpetuation of duality can be slowed and stopped, is by starting to transmute and release these energy packets, by starting to recode the data, by starting to clear these programs. As the clouds clear, as an analogy, the clouds clear, the sun behind the clouds will start to appear. As you start to recognize the sun, aka your true self, the soul, as you start to recognize that, more clouds clear, until such point where it becomes undeniable of who you truly are, and you start embodying that through the simulation itself, because all veils can dissolve. So I hope that's been helpful in providing anyone who's listening with a little bit of clarity about the non-dual self, how duality keeps perpetuating itself in your experience, how to start unwinding the perpetuation of duality and separation, which is ultimately the perpetuation of suffering. And if you want to find out more about the different tools and techniques that I've used throughout the time to start collapsing these programs and energy packets, then I'll probably link up a video here or somewhere around this about certain tools and techniques, including inner child work, clearings, energy block removal, and probably my favorite and the most powerful technique I use, that I call the golden thread technique. It's going to be in one of these videos up here, so go and check that out. If any of this resonated, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below, and hope that helps. Thank you.